Welcome back, Dr. Larry Carnes. Come on, we're going to move forward with this. We're excited to have a special guest with us, Mr. Hill. Well, let me put it this way, Dr. Hill. Dr. Hill, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. I hope you're doing well there, too.
We're just awesome here. We're awesome here. We're honored to have you as our guest, and we want you to talk with us about this exciting book, the DNR Trilogy. Now, when I was reviewing this and looking at it, I was just blown away. You talk about J.D. Brewster, and you speak about his world of darkness that alienated him from his colleagues. I thought that quite interesting. Introduce yourself to our audience and then share this book with us.
All right. Thank you very much. My name's Dr. Don W. Hill. I'm a medical oncologist, and I've been in the practice of medicine now for about a third of a century. And I wrote the DNR Trilogy in an effort to purge some dark things that were dwelling in my soul over many years. The nidus of the book, the germination of the book started when I was at an American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting that was about 15 years ago in Florida. And to be frank, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had overheard two women talking about a dark event that happened apparently in the early 1980s. And they had related to each other the story of a prisoner who had been sentenced to a life sentence in prison for various and sundry multiple murders. Apparently the individual, as best I could tell, was a drug dealer.
Yes.
And the event happened in the early 1980s. He was incarcerated for life. And at the time, there was a new disease process that had appeared on the scene that at the time was called GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency syndrome, that was now known as AIDS. Well, in any event, the patient was admitted with an acute fever and was transferred from the prison system to the hospital. And while he was in the hospital, this nefarious individual actually murdered a nurse. And he was sent back to prison. Nothing came of it because he already had a life sentence.
Yes.
Well, about 6 months later, he was sent back to the hospital system with another episode of acute fever. And this time, the house staff got together and they made sure that this individual did not leave the hospital until, shall we say, he was room temperature. They had actually murdered the fellow and apparently away with it. And the more I thought about this event, I thought, good Lord, this is a grim story. I wonder if it was true. But the women that were talking, they told the event with such veracity and such passion. I believe it to be a real story.
Yes.
And I based the trilogy upon the prospects of something like this happening, where a medical student who was dispirited and dehumanized could participate and actually orchestrate an act of vigilante justice in this fashion.
Yes. You know, as I was researching and looking at the book, I thought of that. I said, wow, you talk about some retaliation. Now, this was definitely retaliation. You mentioned something here about the dehumanizing clinical clerkship rotations. I looked at that. Yeah. So speak to us about that.
Well, things have changed in medical school training. But when I went to medical school some 40 years ago in Houston, it was a brutal experience. Students were treated harshly, and any mistake or any error or any untoward outcome that would happen in a clinical setting, where those events were generally blamed upon the student or the house staff, clinical clerks, the residents and the interns, whether it was their fault or not. It was just a default way to shirk responsibility onto lesser beings that had less power.
Yeah.
And while I was in medical school, and actually over the course of my entire career, I witnessed a lot of brutal things that people had done to each other. And I had become discouraged and actually wondered if somewhere along the way that perhaps God made a mistake and he gave a soul to the wrong primate. Ergo, the name of the first book is Backing the Wrong Primate. And the cover of the book shows a depiction of something similar to what's seen on the Sistine Chapel, where the hand of God is reaching down to impart a soul upon his creation, Adam. And the cover of the book, it's changed from God reaching out to touch the hand of Adam to God reaching out to touch the hand of an orangutan. As the protagonist in the book, Brewster, he professes that you don't see our fellow primates running through the trees, shanking each other and robbing each other and carjacking each other and committing crimes against each other that humans seem to have a predilection to do.
Yes.
And it wonder that perhaps, God made humans, but we turned out to be such a disappointment to him that he's wandered off to some other part of the universe to work on other projects to let us fend for ourselves.
That's interesting.
And that's an underlying theme. That's an underlying theme to the book, that we've lost our way as humans. And the book is filled with a lot of violence and crime that people perpetrate upon each other, and racism is a strong overtone throughout the book. That humans are tribal by nature, and we seem to cling to certain groups based entirely upon how much pigment that we have in our skin, or the nature, the texture of our hair, or whatever, superficial things that make absolutely no difference to whether we're human or not. And we seem to cling to such just primitive visual cues that we often act upon these superficial markings as to the way we treat our fellow human beings.
That's an interesting statement, Dr. Hill, as I'm listening to you. But, in my observation, just like you said, I see when we take young children and we put these children together, regardless of, race, and if no one, I'm going to say, taints the mind of these children, then they don't grow up with that attitude of racism and those things. They will be one with each other. But it's when we begin to when they're socialized and modified based upon the environments that they're raised in, that's where the problems come in.
I agree, sir. I agree wholeheartedly. And I'm concerned that in our society today, there seems to be a trend towards segregation of people based upon what they look like. And to me, this is a step back to what I remember from when I was a kid back in the early 1960s. And I just think it's wrong. I think we're making a big mistake. I think we're creating divisions in our country that shouldn't be there. And it's not necessary. I think racial harmony has taken a turn for the worse over the last decade. And I'm very saddened to see that. People are no longer trusting each other and feeling comfortable. Oh, you're a fellow human being. You're a fellow American. You deserve to be treated as I would treat anybody else. Now we're putting people in categories again. I just think it's wrong. I think it's an uncomfortable situation, and it could lead a lot of strife and the social discord that's coming down the road.
Oh, absolutely. I concur with you 100%. Now, when we think about that and begin to unpack that from what you're saying, education is a key thing. But as I look at some of the younger people whose minds aren't being tainted by people who live those lifestyles and see the differences, we've noticed how a lot of younger people have band together in support of the different movements and different ethnic groups, nationalities. We know what controversy the Black Lives Matter thing has brought about. But when we look at forces there were people who were not people of color, once again, who were on the front line supporting that, but from a younger generation. So I think what's your perspective from that? What do they call them? Generation Gen or whatever the generation thing is, you know. What's your perspective on the mindsets of these younger generations that's coming along?
Well, unfortunately, I think from my perspective of being a middle-aged male on the threshold of being old, I'm in my mid-60s now, and of Caucasian persuasion, it seems that there seems to be a trend to try and shame people for what are immutable characteristics. My family, my maternal side of the family, came to the United States in the 1890s, long after the American Civil War. My family never participated in any slavery activity. I don't believe there is such a thing as generational sin. In fact, if you look at my father's side of the family, my one of my great relatives was General McClellan, who fought for the Union in the American Civil War to try and free the slaves.
My goodness! And you know what? We've got a minute and 30 seconds. Now we could go on because this is quite interesting here. So this is what I want you to do for us. Please share your contact information, how people can get in touch with you, and how people can get this book, because I find it fascinating as I researched it. Share your contact information, how people can get your book.
Sure. My name is Dr. Don W. Hill, and the book is currently being published through BookWhip, and the book is available on Amazon, and you can go to the BookWhip site. I do have a website, www.donwhillmd. You can see all the three books in the trilogy, and the DNR Trilogy that includes the first volume, which is Backing the Wrong Primate. The second is No Good Deed, as in no good deed goes unpunished, as the protagonist finds that whenever he tries to do the right thing, it ends up backfiring in his face. And the third book is Clinical Justice, where the protagonist organizes a vigilante crew to kill a hospitalized murderer.
Thank you.
And so
Thank
those
you.
are the three books in the trilogy.
Yes, sir. You know, it's been a pleasure to have you with us, and that's the DNR Trilogy. You want to go look it up, go to Amazon. I've gone look it up. Dr. Don Hill. It's powerful. He gives insight. I'm sure you've enjoyed having Dr. Hill as our special guest. Listen, I'm Dr. Carnes. It's been a pleasure to have you here on Books of the Month. Dr. Hill, thank you so much, sir. And for our viewing audience, we look forward to seeing you next time on Books of the Month.